log in. Try that one more time. All right, 1 second. Almost there. Well, here we go. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome, everybody. It has been an interesting morning, and we are just now getting our internet back. So I'm glad this is being recorded, and hopefully if you are unable to see this now, you'll be joining us via the recording. I'm Hillary Richardson. I'm the coordinator of undergraduate research, and this is our fall 2021 student workshop on how to find a faculty mentor. One moment. All right, so today's panel is being recorded and will be available through our YouTube page, but we will also share links to that recording. And today's panel is about how to participate in undergraduate research through getting involved with a mentor, a faculty mentor. We're going to talk with faculty, but also a student about how they did it as students and advice that they would give other people who are interested but not sure how to get started. One way is to look at our Office of Undergraduate Research website, which is here on the page, muw.edu/our/opportunities. That has links to research opportunities, conference opportunities, ways that undergraduates can publish, and even internships that they could do over the summer. Additionally, if you come to this or look at this recording and say, I think I'd like to do that over the summer, you could apply to be a summer scholar at the link that you see on this. And I will put these links in the chat here in a minute. In the spring, we will have another workshop on how to submit and present at the Undergraduate Research Conference in the spring. So in addition to that date, mark your calendars there. We'll also have a workshop preceding the conference on what to do if you want to submit and present. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Erin Kemker, who's a professor of history. She's a department chair of HPG and the coordinator of Interdisciplinary American Studies minor. She teaches American history, women's history, and 20th century history, and has researched and published on women's political history, grassroots political movements, second wave feminism, and the history of American conspiracy and right-wing politics. Her book is Big Sister: Feminism, Conservatism, and Conspiracy in the Heartland. We have Dr. Malaysia Henry. She's very engaged in community education and service. She's passionate regarding issues of women's health, pregnancy, and childbirth, and has hosted and led seminars on domestic violence and women's heart health, women's breast health, women's nutrition, and osteoporosis. Dr. Henry obtained her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Mississippi College in 1982 and a Master's in Nursing from the University of Mississippi in 1991. She completed her PhD in education with an emphasis in nursing in 2016 and continues to seek opportunities for scholarship and research. We also have Dr. Dorothy Berglund, whose research involves a general focus on the scholarship of teaching and learning, specifically looking at how problem-based learning stimulations impact undergraduate critical thinking skills and implicit bias in learners in undergraduate family science classrooms. She's also conducted research on campus sexual violence policies and programs and state and provincial level woman abuse policies and programs. She is the chair of the Psychology and Family Sciences Department and a professor of family science. We also have Dr. Josh Doman, who earned his PhD in philosophy along with a graduate certificate in disability studies from the University of Memphis. His research interests include 20th century French philosophy and the ways in which our social identities affect our knowledge. Dr. Hedda is a professor of biology in the sciences and math department. He teaches human anatomy, general and microbiology, and specializes in researching the misfolding of proteins that lead to cystic fibrosis. He has mentored many students in his lab, including one of our panelists, Z, who I'll introduce in a minute. And in doing so has facilitated several student conference presentations and publications. We have Dr. Hope Durst, who has taught in Lowndes County K-12 schools and worked in distance education at Mississippi State University before joining the faculty of the School of Education at the W. The cognitive process of learning has always been an area of interest for Dr. Durst, but the growing platform of online learning piqued her interest as an area of research. Her doctoral dissertation research focused on effective practices to support undergraduate students in their online learning programs. We also have Dr. Andrew Nguyen. He's from Canada and is a huge fan of Toronto Maple Leafs hockey. He completed his undergrad in Florida and went back to Canada for his master's and PhD, where he worked on a number of communication, relationships, and social influence projects. His main body of work is currently focused on damage control and attitude assessment. And last but certainly not least is our student participant, Zitlali Amaskita, or Z. She's a 2021 Summer Scholar alumna and honor student from ECRU, who is graduating in May of 2022. She was a student in Dr. Hedda's lab, using techniques and generating data for the study of causes of cystic fibrosis. After graduating, she plans on pursuing a master's degree in teaching. So welcome to all of our participants. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to ask you all each a few questions. And just for the interest of time, I'll call on a couple of you for some of the questions, and I'll let you know if the rest of the questions are for everyone. But this first question is for all of you. So, and I'll just kind of go down the line. I'll look at my screen and I'll call on someone who's first. But if you could briefly say, in your discipline, what kinds of research students could expect to do if you were their mentor? And Dr. Henry is first on my screen. So Dr. Henry, could you briefly say, like, what counts as research? What is research in your discipline, and what might a student do if they were researching with you?
Most of my research is quantitative research, and I've done both experimental and non-experimental. Of course, my areas are, women's health. That's always something I'm very passionate about, mentoring someone in. And then I love simulation. In fact, my doctoral dissertation was on simulation, and if that improved students' critical thinking, but also their self-confidence. And so those are some of the things that I enjoy mentoring. Of course, I mentored several groups in the nursing program, in the BSN program, and now continue to do the same in the RN to BSN program. And we try to find current topics, and we we try to let the students have a voice in what they want to research.
Thank you. Dr. Hedda, you're next on my screen. Could you answer this question? Dr. Hedda, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. As you all know that I am a biologist in the Department of Biology, Science and Math here. And you also mentioned that we work on the cystic fibrosis. So cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease, which is common among the white Caucasians of North European origin. And it's a genetic disease. So basically it happens because one of the protein in our cells is defective. And the function of that protein is to traffic chloride ions that causes the cystic fibrosis. So having said that, my lab uses the techniques of cell biology, that is tissue culture. As our model, we have different cell lines from the human origin, which are normal cells or mutated or unhealthy cells that we call from the cystic fibrosis patients. So we culture them in the lab, and then we use different compounds to treat those cells. And these are the compounds that we obtain either from my collaborators or that we obtain commercially. And their primary role for this chemical compound is that they can be potential for the treatment to repair this defective protein in the human cells. So we use the techniques of tissue culture to culture those cells. And then rest are the techniques of biochemistry that we, mine is basically protein lab, protein biochemistry lab. We also do some RNA, DNA work also. So it uses the techniques of protein biochemistry like gel electrophoresis that separate the protein based on their size. And then we transfer those proteins onto a solid surface membrane so that we can handle properly, and we call the technique Western blotting. So what this technique do is basically detect the level of expression of this particular protein that I call as a chloride ion channel. And when it is defective, causes the disease, cystic fibrosis. And then we also isolate the DNA, RNA from these cells. And then we look at the RNA level, which is required for the synthesis of the protein. So in general, in summary, if any student who is interested in pursuing their career on this angle using the techniques of cell biology and learning the protein biochemistry, learning about how to go after the genetic diseases, then my lab is the place to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hedda. Dr. Berglund, what kinds of research would a student do if you were their mentor?
Well, as a family scientist, we tend to focus on what's called translational research, which basically means applied research. And they could, do some of the things that you already mentioned, like helping with the study on how problem-based learning simulations impact student learning. But the other thing that was probably not mentioned, and I probably didn't mention it when I sent my responses to you, is that I'm probably right now the only sexologist on campus because my dissertation research was on how premenstrual dysphoric disorder impacted marital dynamics. And I teach the human sexuality class on campus that's open to students in the public health major, as well as to students in our department. And I do a lot of stuff in there with the students related to sexology and, questionnaires and, measures of student knowledge about sexual health and things like that. And there's actually this instrument out there called the Sexual Knowledge Survey. And I've had a long interest in revising that because it really does need some updating. That's one of the things, other things, like I said, I've, done some research on policies and programs. around sexual assault and domestic violence in terms of policy research, as well as like looking at programming that may be out there that you could bring to, say, a college campus on these topics. And I just found out that a paper I just gave at our big conference in our field, the National Council on Family Relations annual conference, was actually somebody who I think the editor of the Family Relations Journal, which is the Journal of Applied Family Science, saw our presentation and is actually interested in having us take our paper presentation and making it into a publication for that journal. And what we're looking at is applying the contextual model of family stress along with the study of adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress to experiences on campus, given the COVID-19 pandemic and social unrest, social justice movements over the past like 20 months or so. And if somebody's interested in helping with lit reviews on that and so on, that's something else that I'd be willing to work with too.
Thank you, Dr. Barkland. Dr. Durst, what could students do if you were their research mentor?
Well, some descriptive research, qualitative and quantitative research. I think what would most help students in preparing to go into the field and have their own K-12 classrooms would be studies on specific strategies and teaching methods and how that affects student success, parent communication, anything that interests them that they see as something they need to bring into their classroom, maybe as a weakness of theirs. To me, that would be something good to study, whether it be behavior management strategies, engagement strategies, different strategies that they could give themselves research in the literature review process, and then find a correlation between some sort of practice and student success.
Awesome. Dr. Doman, what would a student do if you were their faculty research mentor?
Well, a student would have a pretty wide range of things to talk about. Really, in philosophy, we make and evaluate arguments, and we make and evaluate concepts. So a student could work on developing a specific interpretation of a philosopher's idea. They could work on evaluating a philosopher's idea, or they could test the extent to which a philosopher's idea applies or doesn't apply to life or a particular example. The things I'm interested in right now are metaphors used for economic explanation, the ways that we understand work and labor. And I'm also interested in disability and the extent to which disabled individuals have their knowledge discounted. So if someone wanted to work directly with me on something I'm working on, those would be the topics.
And Dr. Demon, I'm sorry, not Dr. Demon. Dr. Drouillard, who works with Dr. Demon, also had a summer scholars mentee who did something that you mentioned, which was to take a philosopher's idea and apply it to her life and her major, which was music therapy. And she's presenting on that, I think, this month. So that'd be another example, not to steal your thunder, but to elaborate. Thank you. Z, you're next. I know you're not mentoring anybody, but I would like to hear kind of your experience as someone who was mentored and who in turn worked with another student who was new to the discipline. I'm talking about Sarah Lynn.
Well, just overall, it was a nice experience. And I mean, it still is. I'm still being mentored by Dr. Heda in his lab. And it's just nice. I keep learning new things, new techniques. And it's like, there's those failed experiments, but with those, I'm like learning like how I should have done this, or it could have improved and stuff. So it's just constant learning, which I really appreciate. And yes, I've got to work with Sarah Lynn, who is new to research. And in a way, it provided me with a little bit of teaching experience in some ways that I was helping her through the summer process, but it was nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Nguyen, what might somebody do as a research student under your mentorship? And you're still muted.
Right. Thanks for reminding me. So what I do can be considered experimental research, and students will help collect data either online or in person in an effort to figure out how certain psychological effects work, as well as examine specific factors that might affect how they work. So depending on where you come in the process, you might help design a believable scenario, like help write a courtroom setting where somebody's on trial for certain crimes and people will have to judge this person based on the available evidence. And you will help create this evidence for the crime. Or you might help write dating profiles that primarily exhibit characteristics like wealth, humor, physical attractiveness, and so on. So there's a lot of creative possibilities involved in the project design phase. Then in the data collection phase, it's mostly just gathering responses and compiling them. And then in the analysis phase, there's a bunch of analysis and interpretation involved. So depending on where you come in, you might be a part of one or all of these stages, especially if it's your project.
Excellent. And it's good to hear you talk about the creative possibilities. I think that applies to every discipline. In one way or another, you're assigned with a task, but you sometimes have to use creative problem solving to get to that. Dr. Kemker, what would a student do, and what have students done as you being their mentor?
In history, all students are required to complete the capstone. So all students do have an undergraduate research experience in history, and like philosophy, they tend to be very broad. Students have really a lot of opportunity to engage in research on topics that are that reflect their interests. The only thing that really holds them together is that there will be an archival experience. And so for us, at least, our work is always rooted in an archival experience for students. Typically, this is a physical space, an actual archive where they will go and find documents, primary sources related to their topic. And whether that's the MUW archive or the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, there are a lot of different opportunities for them for physical archives. And that's really the most highly prized research that engages with physical archives and archival documents. There are also possibilities for online archives and digital primary sources as well. And so all history majors engage in some form of undergraduate research. If I were working with a student directly, there are a couple of opportunities and possibilities. Over the summer, I worked with Maggie Ellis in the Summer Scholars Program, and they were looking at the history of antebellum home in our area. And really trying to create a 21st century narrative about the sort of antebellum homes that we see, their connection to slavery, the experience of the enslaved, and incorporating that into a description of the home. And so we're doing some public history work with local homeowners on that, and that is one possibility.
Excellent. It's good to hear the range of things that students do in working with different disciplines. We've got people working in a lab or in an archive or in a digital space, people researching methods that apply to their real lives. All of these things are super interesting, but it's really good to hear that you all are interested in answering a question that impacts your discipline, so that you're not just, well, in one way you are researching to learn, but in another way you're also researching to share. So thank you for sharing those things. The next question that I have, I'm gonna ask individuals to answer just for the sake of time. But maybe at the end, if you have a really interesting answer, feel free to share. So Einstein is quoted as saying, "I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious." And this is oft cited as something that you need to be a researcher. You don't need to be super smart, just really stubborn or passionately curious. So what's another characteristic you think an undergraduate researcher should have? And this question first is for Andrew.
Okay, so for me, one of them is gonna have to be self-sufficiency. A lot of the time you'll be told what to do and provide with instructions on how to do it in undergrad, especially in your courses. It's actually built right into the requirements for your syllabus. You know, major projects and assessments need to be mentioned and their due dates made clear and everything you need to complete them. All the tools will be given to you, but most of the time, and most of the time, your test won't be on any new material, just the stuff that you've seen in your textbook. So all this means is everything's very straightforward in your undergrad classes. But research is not straightforward. Oftentimes, nobody knows the answer, nobody has all the answers. And a supervisor, for example, might say, okay, so you'll need to go and build a script in this program. And if you want some help, here's somebody who's done something like this before, and off you go. You've never seen this program before, but you'll figure it out. Or, okay, go build materials for this experiment. Once again, off you go. And it's up to you to create some believable passages for the scenario in your experiment. And that's not really in any textbook. You'll need to figure out a lot more on your own compared to what you might be used to in class. You'll be doing a lot of Googling, a lot of corresponding with people, a lot of chatting with your colleagues, but this is completely normal. It's a normal part of the process. So it's very different from the classes that you might be used to in that regard.
Josh, what do you think? Do you have anything to elaborate, to add?
I would just say that being self-reflective is an important quality for someone who wants to do research. It's good to know why you're interested in doing research in the first place, and then to sort of check in as you're doing the research on what is continuing to motivate you. I would hope you'd be passionate about anything you're doing research on, but I know that there are a lot of pressures to do research today and to have something to get into grad school, or you might be doing it just because your faculty member comes up to you and says, hey, that was an interesting idea. You should do some more work on that, right? So taking time to take stock of what it is that's motivating you to do the research, to me, that seems like something that would be useful.
Hope, you said you have an answer to this. What would you add to that?
To piggyback on what they just said, I think persistence is a helpful trait as well, to overcome obstacles, to be okay with failure. You're going to run into, doors that sort of shut in your face. And so to persist through those obstacles is really important. Like one of my colleagues said, being self-sufficient, sometimes if you face, a professor or colleague that is not as helpful as you'd like. So sort of overcoming all of these obstacles and persisting through them to see this research project through, you'll be thankful in the end that you did that.
Thank you. And I want to point out that among all of those answers, did not hear anyone say you have to be an honor student, you have to be smart, you have to be, trained from a long time ago. So I just want to point that out, that you just need some will. So my next question is, what is a skill you learned doing research that has served you well, either professionally or personally? And we'll start this question with our summer scholar on the call, Z. What's something that you learned that has served you well since being a summer scholar with Dr. Hedda?
I feel like I've learned various skills, but the one that comes to my mind or at the top of my head is just paying attention to detail, especially like small detail. I've had my share of failed experiments just because of small details that I didn't observe. But yeah, doing research has definitely helped me improve this. And I feel like this can serve professionally or personally as well.
Excellent. Andrew, what is a skill that has served you well from your practice doing research, either personally or professionally?
Well, this has been touched on so far, and it may sound a little weird to hear this, but I've learned how to fail. I've learned how to be persistent and glean success from failure. You will fail a lot. As a researcher, failure will be second nature. Chances are most of your experiments, most of your analysis will produce results that aren't exactly what you expected. Most of your manuscripts won't be accepted, certainly not on the first try. It's extremely rare that you get a direct acceptance without at least a revise and resubmit. Now, you won't be too familiar with failure as a good student, but as a researcher, you should get very comfortable with the idea of failing. But that's just half the battle. The other half is seeing what you can glean from the failure. So, for example, let's say an experiment didn't work. Why didn't it work? What could you modify to make the next one work in the series? What needs to be fixed, and what did work that you could take from that experiment and implement it in the next one? It's this second part that I wasn't really taught, that I kind of had to learn bit by bit, but it really is a necessary part of research, and not just research, but outside as well. When you apply for jobs, you probably won't get immediate acceptance. The acceptance rate for tenure track faculty, for example, is very low. If you give up after your first rejection letter, you won't really get very far, right? So without this kind of persistence, this dogged determination to push through in the face of failure, research will be a tough journey full of setbacks. But if you have that mindset, then it can be very rewarding when everything comes together in the end.
It's interesting to hear you say, like, if you're a good student, you might use different skills than if you're a good researcher, or if you're, I guess, a persistent researcher. So thanks for pointing that out. They're both good skills to use, but somehow different at the same time. Dorothy, you said that you'd like to answer this question. What's a skill you've learned that served you well personally or professionally?
Well, I would third what the other two have said. Basically, persistence, patience, perseverance. Pretty much, I wrote down here, failure. You have to expect it, because but the thing is, it's a good thing because it takes you in another way. It takes you in a completely different direction. You have to figure out, why is this not working? And if you're interested in solving puzzles, doing research is excellent for that. Because a lot of times you're like, this stuff, I learned this as an undergrad because I had the chance, even though I did not go into human factors psychology, obviously, I had the opportunity to work in a human factors lab. And the first experiment I helped run as an undergrad student failed. And we had to figure out why. And this was new to me because I had been in classes, I think Andrew mentioned this, you're in a class where everything's clean for you. Even if it has a lab component, it's meant to work in a certain way, and it usually does. And you have grad students helping you clean and screen your data so everything is tickety boom perfect when you do your result, you do your analysis and write up your results. But this real life experiment didn't work, and we had to figure out why. And he wasn't having the grad students do it. He was having us, the undergrads, figure out why this thing didn't work. And like I said, human factors psych is not my area. It's not what I planned to do, but I wanted the research experience. And you have to learn to accept failure and to figure out why, and think of it as a puzzle, not like, oh, this is horrible. I noticed this with some of my undergrad students in human sexuality when we did research. They had a bunch of awesome usable data, and this one piece of data that they couldn't use was frustrating them to no end. And I said, look, that happens. We had, that it just happens. You get unusable data. I think the other thing I would say, it's not just patience about, figuring out what to do next and thinking, and knowing that you're in this for the long haul, because you don't just do one study and it ends. Oh, we answered all the questions. You get about 20 more per study, maybe not literally, but you get a bunch more, and you have to try to figure out to answer those. But I think patience, especially in a field like mine, which is an applied discipline, because if you're doing this to solve a real world problem, a lot of times you don't get that result right away. Like, I did research on domestic violence policies and programs when I lived in Canada, and I was up there for 5 years. And a bunch of us presented our results to the premier to help solve a particular problem, which is recantation on the stand. Like, a lot of these survivors would go to court, but they'd recant their testimony because the abuser was sitting right there staring at them and intimidating them. And that's a problem to solve. And, policy does not change on a dime. especially if you're doing more of the educational approach and sharing with policymakers what to do. It wasn't until 6 years after I left Canada, I found out that our research eventually led to the change in a law that actually helped victims. But again, if you're doing applied research, it may not result in that change right away either. So it's not just about how can you solve a problem within your study and figure out what to do next. It's also realizing that your results may not have immediate applicability to what you're doing.
Thank you. I hear a resounding problem solving is the answer to this. I've also heard a lot of people say has given them confidence in their field. And so I think problem solving has something to do with that. You know, once you can solve a problem and know that even if you've encountered failure, it's not over, you feel more confident. So excellent. All right, moving on to our next question. Did you participate in a research project when you were an undergraduate student? And if so, how did you find a mentor? What's the first step? And we'll start with Z, who did participate in a research project. So let's skip that part of the question, but how did you find a mentor? And what's the first step if you're interested in getting involved in research, but you're not sure what to do?
Well, like you said, I did participate in the undergraduate research. I was a summer scholars for the W in that program, but I'm also doing an independent study for honors that I'm currently in. But I actually found Dr. Hedda when one of my professors informed me that he was willing to mentor students in research. And so after that, I visited him, and then I just reached out to him through email, but also went to his office and just let him know that I was interested in it. And then he allowed me to visit his lab and just see what his students in there were working on. He let me run a couple experiments, not experiments, but like training to do simple stuff already get me a feel of what his lab would include or what it'd be like. And also in lab, I got to talk to students who were currently working in there, and they told me about the expectations and what working in it was like. So I guess the first step would just be like reaching out to professors in your department. They're very willing to point you towards faculty who is doing research, and then getting towards the faculty who is doing, they're also willing to explain their research and just get you going for that.
Excellent. Just making that first leap. Yes. Andrew, did you participate in undergraduate research? And if so, how did you find a mentor when you were a student? What's the first step?
Yeah, so I dragged my feet a little as an undergrad. It took me a while to figure out what I even wanted to do with my life. So it wasn't until my third year that I really got started. But when I did figure out what to do, I immediately jumped in the deep end. I went on my university website, looked at all the labs that interested me, and I volunteered for as many as would take me, which at the time was 2. And now that I've got my research opportunities, I went in and I did the best job that I could. And after some time, I found myself quite interested in one of the projects I was working on. So I asked if I could present a poster on it, and the prof said yes. So I got myself a poster, which was my first research experience and presentation at an international conference. And because I had no idea what I would do, and I was given a grad student to show me the ropes, so I got a mentor that way. So in the other lab, which I volunteered, the prof offered to supervise me as an honor student. And this was great because she gets like 100 applications every year, but she offers it first to people who volunteer in her labs. So it's basically getting your foot in the door. I never imagined these opportunities to be there when I first started. I just heard that you should volunteer to get some research experience, and that's what I did. But a lot of the time, people use that volunteering to try to get a gauge of how you would do in that environment, how you would work with them. And people tend to prefer known quantities over the unknown. So you end up in situations where people would give first priority to those they already know. So there are many opportunities that will present themselves that you won't know about, and they'll be connected to the opportunities that you do know about. So as a first step, I would highly recommend just asking for a meeting with somebody and come sit down and chat. That's all it takes. Nothing needs to come out of it. Worst comes to worst, you leave half an hour later with a deeper understanding of the topic that you're interested in. But you do want to reach out. We love to talk about our research. And if there are opportunities, you'll know about them. And then, things will snowball from there. It also helps when you need reference letter. You don't just want positive letters. You want specific letters. The norm is, positive letters. So that's kind of hard to distinguish between, candidates that you want to accept for your program. They want to see specific letters, and where you get that is from somebody who knows you as more than just a student in class. So if there's a prof that you like, if there's a prof working on something that you find interesting, my suggestion for a first step is to reach out for a chat.
Thank you. And Josh, what did you participate as an undergraduate in any research project? And if so, how did you do that?
I did. I wrote a paper in a class about how the Garcia girls lost their accents. And the teacher for that course said it was strong, and then said, I'm working on this book about narratives of immigration in young adult literature. Would you want to help with a literature review on it? So I think the sort of lesson I learned from that is be on the lookout for times where you're both getting positive feedback from faculty you're working with, and you're passionate about the topic, right? So you're interested in taking it further. You don't want to just treat it as a paper or a project that you use to get a grade in a course. You'd like to do something more with it.
Thank you. I love these answers, all of them. Our next question, what advice do you have for a student who thinks there's a typo, no, that's not a typo. What advice do you have for students who think they might want to do independent research? And this one's for Dr. Henry, Malaysia. What advice do you have for students?
I think the first thing is they need to realize the commitment, the time that's going to be involved, but I would encourage them to choose something that they're passionate about. You kind of like Josh just said, don't look at it as another paper or a stepping stone to get somewhere, but choose something that really means something to you, something that you're passionate about, and something that you might get to see implemented or make a change. So that would be my advice. Choose something you're passionate about. Maybe as like a nursing student, I saw students getting frustrated because they would leave after a simulation and they might leave so upset because they made a wrong choice or didn't make as good a choices as they could during the simulation, and maybe their patient didn't have as good an outcome. And we tell them, it's a safe place. It's a safe place to learn, you're not really going to hurt these patients. But as I watched those students, I thought, what could I do to make that better for them? And that's what I based my dissertation around, was taking them after debriefing and after we discussed everything, the good and choices and the ones that weren't as good, giving them an opportunity to go back into the simulation lab and repeat that same simulation and that same scenario. And they did much better, and they left feeling good about it. They left feeling, excited, and that they had learned something and they'd done something positive. But I chose that because I was passionate about it. I wanted to see that change for the students and then look forward to simulation instead of dreading it. And so I was passionate about that, and it made it much more interesting, and I love doing it.
Thank you. Erin, what advice would you have for students who think they want to do independent research?
Well, I would probably try to figure out with them or have them figure out, is this something that they are electing to do on top of their coursework? Is this something that is part of their coursework? So, just there's lots of different kinds of opportunities for independent projects. So, just try to figure out what is the actual curriculum of my program offering me? Is this something that I'm going to face in a capstone, or is this something that I'm being asked to do for an upper level history class? Or upper level class, regardless of the discipline. And I think if it's a requirement, you definitely want to do as Dr. Doman and Dr. Henry said, you want to find a way to turn that requirement into something that you're passionate about. That would be the first kind of thing. Marry those two things, a requirement and your interests. If it is elective in that it's a summer scholars program, you're doing it obviously because you want to, from there, it's just about talking to faculty about the opportunities that exist and finding yourself someone who will work with you as a mentor. And that can be as simple as starting. I would encourage everyone to start with talking to their academic advisor about that kind of thing, because they will direct you in those in the paths or the ways that you can access those sorts of things. So think about the different kinds of things that are going to exist inside the curriculum of your major. I know there are some students who also look for projects outside of their major. So if that is the case, you might want to reach out to someone who is not your academic advisor, but an advisor in the discipline that you're interested in studying or working in. That would be my initial response to students interested.
And Sham, what advice would you give someone who wants to do independent research?
Well, what I would say is that research requires a lot of dedication. I heard these keywords: dedication, patience, having lots of time, ready to be facing the failure. And all of these things are challenging. It makes you tough. So there is a misnomer, misunderstanding that the research is only if you are a student. I fully disagree with that. So research requires, your dedication, what you want to do. It requires lots of patience. And as Andrew said, it requires a lot of, you're willing to face the failure. So it's like, you fall down and then you get up and then you should be ready to fall down again. So it's making you more challenging, more tough. You should be ready to face all that. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of rewards. It makes you your curriculum distinct. It makes you stand out in a crowd. And when you succeed, when you achieve your goal, and it brings a smile on your face, gives you lots of pleasure. So those are the benefits and those are the drawbacks of the research. So the bottom line is, the keywords, the dedication is required, lots of patience is required, and that all of these things, make you tougher and gives you happiness.
Yes, happiness is something that we haven't brought up, but
Mhm.
we've mentioned failure and patience and persistence and doggedness, but also it is fun. This is the last question. And if you could say in like just a sentence or two, what something a student might want to know about you if they ask you to be a mentor, like just one or two sentences. And we'll start with Dr. Henry.
I have high expectations, but I will also guide you through that. And I care very much about you and your research project. So I'm going to guide you hopefully to being successful, but I do expect you to be responsible and to meet those expectations. I always tell my nursing students that responsibility is just a huge part of nursing. So I expect that up front, responsibility and good time management, because those are threaded throughout our nursing profession, but also know that I'm going to support you.
Dr. Hedda, what's something somebody should know about you?
Okay. I think I have a student who is working in my lab, Z, and she can answer this question the best.
What's something that people should know about Dr. Hedda?
Oh gosh. I guess for you, the same thing. He has high expectations, but just as dedicated he is to his research, he's just as dedicated to helping you through the process, as mentoring you. So it's been nice.
Do you agree, Dr. Hedda?
Well, what I can say is that, the high expectations, as Z said, and it required the flexibility with the time. Once you're trained, you have full flexibility. You have a key for the lab. You can come at any time, around the clock. And the research, I'm talking about biology, and it's a bench work, and it required to be in the lab no matter when. Sometime your self demand that you had to be there in the lab at certain time in the evening or on the weekends. So you should be willing to come at that time. And a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility, and a lot of patience. So these are the things that I can say are required to be working in my lab.
Thank you. Dr. Durst, what's something somebody should know about you if you were to mentor them in research?
A lot of the same things that some people have already mentioned, high expectation, but also, sort of that loving, nurturing side. I want to see my students successful and to have the same passion for research that I do. Nothing excites me more than for them to sort of get that research bug. So I want to see that in my students, but you sort of have to put in the hard work first. Definitely high expectations, sort of pushing and pushing and bending and bending, not for the purpose to break anyone, but for them to see that they have survived and, conquered those obstacles.
Beautiful. Dr. Kemker, what's something somebody should know about you?
I really don't know. I'm not really sure, but I'm sure I've got a reputation, so you could probably find out someone to ask. I guess what I would say, though, just in general about like what I think students might get out of it is learning how to make a big project a weekly, like, benchmarked thing. I find that for undergraduate students, that's one of the most important things that they struggle with, is learning how to break down big things into weekly benchmarks that can be accomplished. I think there's a cram mentality to a lot of undergraduate work. It's not a positive thing. And just learning how to self-regulate and how to make those benchmarks, that can be a very valuable thing. I love that about research. I love making a plan, executing the plan, revising the plan, but then getting back onto it. And learning how to do that for yourself is a really good thing.
I agree. And I think it makes it fun when you have fun notebooks to help with your plan, fun markers that might say something about me that I didn't really plan on revealing. But Dr. Nguyen, what's something somebody should know about you?
I work best with students who show a high degree of persistence. It also works best if the student has a balance of self-reliance and receptiveness to criticism. You got to be able to do things yourself, of course, but when you get feedback, you got to be able to use that feedback. The students should understand that even the best manuscripts written by the foremost luminaries in the field will get marked up in return with tons of criticism when it's submitted to a journal. So it's not really a knock against your ability to receive a lot of feedback. It's all in an effort to create a better product in the end.
Dr. Doman, what's something somebody should know about you if they ask you to mentor them?
I sort of view, so first of all, we don't have a major. So the idea of doing research in philosophy to get to grad school or something like that is a little strange at the W. So I think my perspective on research might be slightly different from a lot of what has been discussed. My view on my role is that I'm just going to try to help you figure out what you're passionate about and then say it as clearly as you can. And so I will just say, I can imagine your project going in direction A, B, or C. What sounds best to you? And then we'll keep coming back and checking in as you're developing your project. And I think that won't come as a surprise, given that I said self-reflection should be one of the the main themes of, or one of the main skills of doing research. But I think doing research in philosophy here at the W can be a lot more low stakes than it might be if you're thinking of research as a way to like boost your CV to get into a grad program or something like that.
Thank you for that perspective. Dr. Berglund, what's something somebody should know about you if they want to do research in family science?
Well, I think pretty much, a lot of the things have already been said. I would like to second the thing about giving constructive criticism, because you do get a lot of markups, even, if you're published and known in the field, and that's just to make it better. And it's because I have that expectation that it can be made better. I think the other thing that everyone would say about me is that I will turn it back on them. Instead of saying like, oh, what do you want me to do? Well, what do you want to do? Where do you think we should go with this next? I'm not going to answer the questions for someone, but I'm going to help them get there by questioning them, because, I get that a lot. What do you want me to do? Well, I want to help you figure this out. And that's something else, is to remember that I'm not going to lead somebody down a path. I'm going to help them figure out what that is for them.
Well, that's great. Thank you all so much. Those are the questions that I have lined up, but I know we have some visitors either on Facebook or in Zoom. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists, our students, our faculty mentors? If not, I have a follow-up question. I hear a lot of times students who want to do research, and they come to me and they say like, I want to do this research, but I'm scared of talking to so-and-so. It's never like one specific person. So nobody has like a reputation of being scary, but I think it's internal, it's intimidating, I guess. So if the advice is just, come talk to somebody, how do you suggest getting over the intimidation of doing that? This is open-ended.
I think you should recognize that we love talking about the stuff that we study. So if you're worried about sounding too eager or something like that, I would say that there's no such thing for most of us, related to our field anyway.
I also think like what everyone has been saying here is really important. And I don't know what the particular student might be experiencing, but certainly in my experience, students who sometimes do very well in the classroom cannot stand research because it is open-ended inquiry and because you can fail. And that is scary. So I would say if you're scared, you're probably smart, and that's good. It is a little scary, but don't let it stop you, because you don't want to be someone who is so afraid of failure that they're not going to try. That's a hard thing. And we all feel it all the time, but it's better to try. It's better to do it. It's better to do it and fail and learn something than to not do it at all. And as far as graduate schools go, we all know that that's better. And that's what graduate schools want as well. They want someone willing to try. So I would say, go on ahead, do it. And don't be
Sorry.
One more thing. Don't be afraid if you don't have a perfect transcript. That's the other thing, because research has often nothing to do with what your academic transcript is to that point.
Well, I think it was something, I'm not sure if Hillary, if you had said something about this, or who had said something about talk to your advisor, talk to your professors. I think that would be a place to start. Start with somebody you're comfortable with. I do remember before I became department chair, the prior chair would say, because she'd have students in some of our introductory classes and they're comfortable with her because they met her. And they would go to her to talk about these things, say, oh, I want to do research on this. Would you be my mentor? And she said, well, that's not really my area of expertise, but Dr. Berglund does this or Dr. Lee does this. And, follow up on that, or if they're really not sure, and everybody's, of course, now with COVID, it's harder, but if you're up there, walk them down the hall and introduce them, make sure that they make that connection, because, we're not scary. I don't think we're scary. just, start with somebody you know who may have that connection to that person that you may not know yet.
And I'm a biologist, and many students who take the biology major, majority of them, they have a dream, either go to the graduate school or either go to the medical school. So any student who have ambitions to continue their studies beyond after undergraduation, go to graduate school, medical school, I think they ought to try working in a lab. I strongly encourage them to find a mentor and do some research in biology if they have ambitions going to the graduate school and study beyond. And don't be scared.
I have one more follow-up question if there's time. And if you would like to answer the other one, then please do. But also, a lot of you have mentioned graduate school. And does research necessitate graduate school or vice versa? Do you have to go to graduate school if you want to do research, or do you have to do research if you want to go to graduate school? Or is graduate school in the cards if you're doing this? What can you do without having to go to graduate school?
Well, the thing is, again, a lot of it's applied. I think that's something else I've noticed with students. I've had some come in who are my advisees, and they say, oh, I just am so scared to apply for grad school because I never did research. And I said, well, you took my human sexuality class as an example, didn't you? Do you remember that project we did where you surveyed undergrads about this or that? And they don't see that as research because it didn't happen in a lab. I mean, not to, not that I'm saying that that's not research, but a lot of times students do have that expectation that, oh, if I didn't do this research in this setting, it's not really research. And I think realizing that, yes, it is. You're looking at a problem, you're trying to solve a practical problem, which is more applicable in my field. I think keeping an open mind about that. I don't think people always have to do research, but I think in my field and, related disciplines in the social sciences, it does help. I also think, getting this experience and realizing maybe this is for you or this isn't for you is a good thing. One thing I do remember from my PhD experience in particular is that there are some in our cohort who couldn't get past the dissertation. And it's because you're expected to do this big piece of independent research on your own. There's nobody setting deadlines, nobody telling you, oh, you have to have chapter 1 done by this day, or at least not in my case. You have to be able to do that stuff on your own, and that in a way that you might not have experienced before. Those are just my thoughts on that.
I would like to add something if I can. The question was, Hillary, you asked, do they have to go to a graduate school? My answer would be that for definitely, not necessarily, because all the students who have worked in my lab, including Josie, who is the current student, they all said that working in the lab allowed them to give the presentation and boost their confidence. So certainly the research experience make you tougher and make you a better presenter.
This kind of depends on your field as well, but you don't really have to go into graduate school after getting research experience in undergrad. That can be a valuable experience in the job market as well, in certain jobs that do value research experience. Like if you're working for Pew Research Center, for example, designing polls, helping on that kind of stuff, it would be, they want to see undergrads with some research experience. So even if you decide not to go into grad school, having some research can be very helpful if you're looking at a career in a field that has that is involved in research. And also a little bit about the other question, if it feels like you might be inconveniencing somebody, a faculty member, by asking them for a personal meeting, and knowledge may vary a little on this, but a lot of the time people will have drop-in office hours. During those office hours, they're just there. So you're not inconveniencing them by just dropping in and having a chat. So if they have that, go ahead, feel free to drop by, you know. If you don't drop by, they'll just be sitting there. So yeah, figure out if they've got office hours, and that's one less barrier if that inconveniencing is a barrier to you reaching out.
And in terms of my specific discipline, family science, it's an applied discipline, and employers do, if somebody is in that discipline, employers do look for research background, because we're supposed to engage in research-based and evidence-informed practice. And, you know, that is something, you know, that does, you know, that they do look for, not just in the job market, but also for internships. You know, they want our students to have that skill, and they expect them to have that skill set. But we build a lot of that into our classes. You know, we have classes where, you know, they're doing policy type research. They have a theoretical paper where they frame research around a particular theory in our field. You know, they have, you know, different experiences like that before they even get there. They even have a grant writing, a class where they write a grant proposal. So they get a lot of this in their coursework anyway. But again, that's related to my specific discipline, but you don't need that experience to go to grad school. But again, we built some of this in just because of what employers and what internship supervisors are looking for.
Thank you all. Are there any follow-up thoughts or questions? All right, I don't see any on Facebook and I don't see any in chat, but I did drop a couple of links, including the ones I showed in the beginning. But I also put in a link for the evaluation for this workshop. If there are questions that you would like some follow-up on, my email address is here. And you can always follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more updates on events or opportunities. In addition to getting emails from the listserv. So thank you all so much. And yeah, I look forward to seeing more students working with you all and learning how to be tough, but also how to have fun and get really good experience. So thanks you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.